It's an historic change in British foreign policy. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, says the UK will recognise the state of Palestine. That's unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and a two-state solution. So what impact could this decision have? And can it help Gazans facing a man-made famine? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the UK is to follow a growing list of Western countries that are recognising the state of Palestine. Spain, Ireland and Norway have already done so, while France and Canada will follow in September. Will this wave of recognition help end the war in Gaza and achieve a two-state solution, or is it merely symbolic?
Horrifying scenes of mass starvation in Gaza and political pressure have led to a major shift in UK foreign policy. Over 200 UK members of Parliament called on Starmer to recognise the state of Palestine. He has bowed to the pressure, but with some conditions.
As part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the state of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
Since the war on Gaza began, 10 countries have recognised the state of Palestine, joining the 147 out of 193 UN member states that already do. France and Canada also plan to recognise the state in September. But the UK's recognition carries special weight because of its pivotal role in the creation of Israel.
Britain is ready to play its full and historic part.
Back in 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, supporting a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. By 1920, Britain took control of Palestine following the end of Ottoman rule. After World War II in 1948, the UK recognised Israel but not Palestine. In the process, millions of Palestinians were displaced. But would formal recognition in 2025 bring peace to Gaza? Israel has rejected the UK's announcement and says it harms efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. As the UK moves towards officially recognising Palestine, will this historic decision open new pathways for peace, or is it a performative gesture?
Well, joining me in the studio, we have Professor Kamel Hawwash. He is the former chair of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. We also have Yossi Mekelberg. Yossi is Senior Consulting Fellow of Middle East and North Africa Programme. That's at Chatham House. He's also columnist for the Arab News newspaper. And in London, we have Leon Cook. Leon is a board member at the Conservative Middle East Council. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Kamel, to you first of all, we're witnessing an extraordinary backlash against Israel in Europe, aren't we?
I believe we are, actually around the world. I mean, if you listen to American officials, you think there's no backlash. But apart from them, really, it is quite astounding that, first of all, we have an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel. Who would have thought that was possible many years ago? And we have these huge marches. People will have seen the marches in London, which I was in one which had 1 million people. But we also had one in Sydney, which was very significant. The scenes from there were quite amazing. There is definitely a backlash, both by the people, but now by some countries which believe Israel's claim it's doing this as a matter of self-defense is completely untrue.
Yossi, to you, how significant is this recognition of Palestine? We're seeing France, the UK, and even if we cross the Atlantic, Canada.
I think it's significant. First, I think it's a loss of sympathy around the world. You know, in 22 months, when the world was rallying around Israel post-October 7, you know, and all prime minister, American president going to Israel, supporting Israel, losing it, and a free fall of support of Israel. I don't think I've ever seen something like this. And then, again, I don't think that recognition in statehood should be sort of a punishment because Israel misbehaved. It should have done long time ago because it's the logical conclusion if anyone wants a two-state solution is recognition of a Palestinian state. I think it's quite unfortunate that it comes as a sort with series of conditions. It comes as sort of a stick against Israel and not seeing the value of recognition Palestinian state as trying to rectify the asymmetry in relations between a state and the PLO, which is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and then dealing with the outstanding issue between the two, between the Palestinian national movement and, of course, the Israel national movement that already manifests in having a state, Israel.
Thanks, Yossi. Leon, to you, there's been a lot of pressure on Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, to do this, recognising Palestine.
There has been, as a former human rights lawyer, I understand why he has done that and why this moment in time. At the same, what is happening in Gaza is absolutely horrific. And you could make the argument that playing nice with Israel has not worked thus far. It's not brought back many hostages at the same time. And it's interesting that the majority of the hostage families are now absolutely advocating for a ceasefire. But from a UK political standpoint and context, he is following the Parliamentary Labour Party rather than leading it. It would be better to have made this decision or announced this when he had 20 of his coalition calling for it rather than an open letter of 200. So is he being diplomatic and a statesman, or is he actually worried about domestic politics and what this means for him? Obviously, in the last couple of weeks, we've also had the advent of a new political party on the left, led by Jeremy Corbyn, who's been a long-standing supporter of Palestine. So there is an element of uniformity across the political coalition. When David Cameron was the Foreign Secretary, he also tipped his hat towards this. But I think that Starmer has found himself now in a very difficult place. He can pick himself out of it if there is any notion of a break of a ceasefire. Hamas have welcomed it, which is, from a media relations standpoint, not the best place to be in as a P5 member in the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Therefore, he can't please anyone. So it'd be very interesting to see how this plays out.
Leon, can I just ask, what did you think was the tipping point? We've seen a lot of pictures of starving, emaciated children on the front pages in the UK over the last 2 weeks. Do you think that was the issue?
That may have been the issue. I think the utterances of Trump in itself, which he basically said, those kids look like they're starving to me, when you've got the leader of the free world also changing slightly his position on this and how he's talking about the water issue. I should say that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, basically dismissed this and the efforts of France and Canada and said that like-minded countries can't necessarily recognize a two-party state. That has to come from Israel and from Palestine themselves. But as I said, I think that the open letter from the 200 MPs is the straw that has broke the camel's back. Labour in a very difficult position after 1 year in government. They are trailing massively in the polls. And while he's enjoyed more popularity in terms of what he has done or executed internationally, he is under a lot of pressure from his left flank. And I think that has been the calculus as to why this is happening now, if I were to be utterly cynical about it.
Thank you, Leon. Kamel, to you, is this largely symbolic, or can it actually lead to something that helps the Palestinian people?
It should have happened before October the 7th. One of the reasons October the 7th came about was because the Palestinians felt they had tried everything, both in terms of armed resistance, in terms of going to the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. They had done everything possible, but the world has just shunned them. And it took for the October the 7th, unfortunately, people died on the Israeli side, and then horrendous crimes that Israel has committed for that to happen. So I think if it is to be useful, it's got to be more than symbolic. And I must warn that the conditions that Starmer and the others have attached make it almost impossible for this recognition to happen. because both on the Hamas front, where they say they must release all the hostages, and on the Israeli front, where there are a number of conditions, but including stopping the killing, Netanyahu is not interested in stopping the killing. Hamas is not going and put down its arms. Hamas, it's not going to do that. So he sits there and he says, well, the conditions haven't been met. I don't need to recognize Palestine. And that's the worst outcome for peace, because actually he should have detached the two from each other. Recognition of Palestine now, when he announced it, and saying to Israel, unless you stop, I am going to cut relations with you. Because think of South Africa, how it was dealt with. We are at a much worse point with 60,000 people killed, and the international community put the United States to one side, should be uniting and saying, we cannot see these pictures, and we can't continue to send arms. We can't. And that means sanctions in Israel, and I think the lady who sits in the Israeli embassy here should be kicked out.
Yossi, to you, Benjamin Netanyahu says this is a reward for Hamas. That was his reaction to Starmer's decision.
First of all, I want to say to my good friend Kamel, nothing justify October 7.
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing justify the way that Hamas...
I think I said...
No, I mean, it's not that it led. I mean, we have to say what Hamas did and the massacre is unforgivable, as I would also say that the Israel response to this is something that we as human beings should completely reject and object. And here where I agree with you, this should have happened a long time ago. I think this is Netanyahu's rhetoric, and we shouldn't take it too seriously. It's not reward Hamas. Again, no one stopped the world to do it 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And why Netanyahu didn't actually advance peace negotiation based on a two-state solution. He's the one that gave many years ago the Bar Ilan speech supporting two-state solution. Not that any one of us believed him, but at least when it was convenient for him, he said that he supported it. But he's the one that derailed any attempt to a two-state solution. He's the one that sabotaged any reconciliation. Again, not that the Palestinians don't have responsibility too, but he sabotaged any reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah because he didn't want election, he didn't want a united Palestinian government or polity that is capable of negotiating in good faith two-state solution. And here is the result of it. This is not a reward for Hamas. It could have done long time ago.
Yossi, can I ask as well your reaction to Hamas's statement, that the key part of it being them calling for Jerusalem to be the capital of any Palestinian state?
I mean, Hamas is not in a position now to put conditions to anyone. At the end of the day, I think what by Israel saying that they keep fighting Hamas, it actually empowering Hamas that it's still a military or political force. Actually, they agreed to a ceasefire and says there is no one to defeat right now because they are not a force to reckon with anymore. But at the end of the day, we know the terms and conditions. Two-state solution, Jerusalem is the capital of both, dealing with the refugees issues in a fair and just position, dealing with settlements, it's all there. And you know what? There are tons of papers that dealt with every aspect of the peace agreement. There is one thing which is missing, leadership.
Thank you, Yossi. Leon, does this mean anything in practice? Because the United States has a veto at the UN, which basically means that this will never fly anyway.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, ultimately, the United Kingdom is a P5 member. And by virtue of that fact, I think that is why so much credence has been put to the utterances of Keir Starmer and why this matters. But Washington have all the agency. That, you know, the hostage families are basically being told, speak to Trump by Israeli officials. And one of the reasons for that is that the hostages aren't part of the focus of Netanyahu. The longer this goes on, the longer he escapes allegations of war crimes and things that have occurred over the last couple of years, many of which are absolutely abhorrent. You don't have to be a parent to look at these images and see that something is fundamentally wrong with the way that this has played out. I think there's an element of Starmer trying to absolutely do the right thing, but if I was to give him advice, it would have been to put hostages at the front and center of this, because had he said, we will recognize Palestine, but a precondition of this would be release of all of the other hostages, You would have had the Israeli population behind him. You'd have had a large part of the international community behind him, but he hasn't done that. And I don't know whether that can be retroactively applied. I'm going to presume not. But the United States is absolutely the whole ball of wax in terms of decision making on what happens next.
Kamel, to you, I noticed several prominent countries in Europe who are still not recognising Palestine: Germany, Italy, Austria, Czech Republic. There is a long list of people in Europe who do not want to see a Palestinian state.
Yeah, include Hungary, which actually waived its membership of the International Criminal Court to receive Netanyahu. So to move from that position to saying the Palestinians have rights and one of them is to statehood is going to be a step too far. But yes, I mean, we heard the word leadership, and that is part of the leadership. I think had Keir Starmer been very clear at saying we recognize Palestine, we should have done it a long time ago, although the question was asked about the hostages, the UK's position since the beginning was the immediate release of all the hostages. So nothing has changed. And even if it were made a condition, Israel on its side has to meet so many different conditions before this recognition comes. So, but the number of countries that have recognized Palestine is immense, more than 140 countries, I believe. So it has left one or two key countries that should be coming up with the recognition.
147 now.
147. So, you know, it has left effectively the United States on its own. All the others are sort of thinking and wavering. And so it is when there is a change in the United States, when there is, as we saw, a condemnation of the settlements, not that the Speaker of the House goes to one of the settlements and says this is all Judea and Samaria and so on. This needs to change. And I think this war has resulted in those who are extremists going with the extremists in Israel to say that Israel doesn't have to do anything, the land is its, rather than recognize Israel will never have security until the Palestinians gain their rights.
Yossi, to you, Netanyahu gave his response. Obviously, there were statements and messages to the press. But if we wanted to see a response on the ground, he has called the war cabinet together, and all the indications in Israeli media are that he will now expand the operation in Gaza.
And this is against the advice of the IDF and the Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, that he appointed and replaced Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi because he said that he is not adamant enough to defeat Hamas, and he appointed Eyal Zamir. Now, Eyal Zamir tells him, this is not, all what we are going to do is to lose more soldiers. We basically exhausted the military target that actually was fighting for. The hostages probably won't, the ones that survived probably won't survive that. And we'll get even more entangled with violating international law. So the IDF, and let alone the military is exhausted. You're talking about reserve soldiers that served around 400 days over the last 22 months.
And people are refusing to go back.
And some refusing, just not showing up. And only 2 days ago, 600, some of the chiefs of the Mossad, of Shabak, of the military, former defense ministries, signed the letter. And interesting, they didn't send it to Netanyahu. They sent it to Trump because they lost hope with Netanyahu. They lost
600 people, is that right? 600 retired
600 generals, head of Mossad, Shabak, signed the letter to Trump and say, do something about that, because this military campaign is basically no objective but keeping Netanyahu in power. And by the way, just as another letter by 1,200 people from the art world also signed it. So there is a malaise within the Israeli society because they want to see the end of the war, the hostages back, and move on with this situation.
Thanks, Yossi. Leon, to you, do you think we're now in a situation where perhaps the two-state solution could be jump-started by what Keir Starmer wants to do?
That's a very big assumption, but I guess it's either never been closer or never been further away. So I think there's an element of this, which is China and other countries have been identifying the hypocrisy of the global West and world order in terms of how it applies international and humanitarian law. And that could also explain why he has chosen to do this now. I think that if if I can give the Prime Minister some credit, the way that he has been able to manage Donald Trump thus far, vis-a-vis Ukraine, how the bilateral relationship between the US and UK, if he can apply that in a electoral political strategy and identify to him how this is going to help him in the midterms, how this is going to help him over the course of his presidency, then I think something can be achieved. Because ultimately, Donald Trump listens to an audience of one, himself. And if he thinks that there is merit in this for himself, albeit that in a peace prize, or how the United States will be perceived globally, God forbid, even financially, can you even imagine applying those terms? But then something potentially could be achieved, but it requires 1600 Pennsylvania and the occupant of that to think it's a good idea for anything to happen.
Kamel, can I ask Palestinian people, how do they feel about hearing that Keir Starmer wants to recognize a state of Palestine? I'm guessing if you're in Gaza and you're on your hands and knees avoiding bombs and bullets and trying to find food for your children, this is all just pie in the sky.
I've been talking to people mostly in the West Bank. It's difficult to talk to people in Gaza. No one I spoke to in Gaza mentioned this. They just want to get food and water. In Ramallah, a lot of the talk is about how they can support the Palestinians in Gaza. There's been an open hunger strike that started last week. People are beginning to go onto the streets, even though the PA doesn't allow people really to go out onto the streets. So that's what they're focused on now. The only people I hear talking about the two-state solution and what Starmer did are the Palestinian Authority diplomats. They seem to think this is a great thing that they've achieved it by pushing. But the reality is, as we said at the beginning, there are so many conditions on this recognition. And even if it happens, there is no mechanism that they've talked about how it becomes a reality. What will happen? Will the settlers be told to leave? Will all of these big questions still remain? So that's why it makes it a little symbolic, but it was the linking of that with stopping the war that people do not accept.
Yossi, I know a government is not its people. Netanyahu probably won't be too bothered about losing the support of European allies. But the Israeli people themselves, how will they feel knowing that France is now recognizing Palestine and the UK wants to too?
I think it depends who you ask. From Netanyahu's point of view, he's trying to rally the base. And with the base, you say, you see, we always told you, they're against us. They're anti-Semites. Here is the proof. They support the rewarding terrorists. The others, they will be a bit more thoughtful, will understand that there is a correlation between the way that Israel behaves and the way the international community reacts to that. But 22 months, even 22 months after October 7, it's a traumatized society. I think we need an end of war, the return of the hostages to restore some normalcy, some rational thinking, and then we can move toward thinking, where we are going from here, thinking about two-state solution, looking at the peace beyond the war. But I'm afraid neither of the societies are there because there are urgent things to deal with them here and now.
And Yossi, Netanyahu's future is inextricably linked to the war in Gaza.
Yeah, and however we look at it, Netanyahu is reaching the twilight of his political career. He's also deeply entangled in a corruption trial, and what he does politically is strongly correlated with trying to get off the hook when it comes to his corruption trial. But elections are not due until October of next year, which can be long 14 months. If they're declared earlier, because there are other issues like drafting of the ultra-Orthodox, it might bring down the government. Then I think again we stand a chance to bring a new government with new thinking and really recover from the Netanyahu's years.
Kamel, are we at a point in history where we could actually see history being made, that a two-state solution is born out of all of this tragedy and suffering on both sides?
I certainly hope so, because the other solutions that have been like a one-state solution, we know the Israelis will never accept. So if you don't have a one-state solution, the two-state solution doesn't happen. What will happen? There are 7 million Palestinians, or a bit more, 7 million Jewish Israelis. So there has to be something that accommodates both. But but the rights of the Palestinians must be met. Because the Israelis, if this goes quiet, they'll go back to work, they'll use their passports to go wherever they want. The Palestinians are still under occupation. So that's why I keep focusing on the rights of the Palestinians come first. And for the UK, of course, in the Balfour Declaration, they talked about the religious and civil rights of the Palestinians, but they didn't talk about the political rights of the Palestinians. This is why going to a two-state solution, which means the political side being tackled, is actually quite an advancement.
Thank you, Kamel. Yossi and Leon as well. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.